Almost nowhere else in the deep ocean can you get funding to go back every year for decades and see how coral reefs develop and see how metals decay and see how currents change. I mean, that just, you can't justify that. No government will pay for that. Nobody wants to go back to just some old reef, but people do want to go back to the Titanic. And that's why we go, is because people want to go.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It's tempting to imagine that the innocent victims of this tragedy are British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman. I mean, in the sense that they simply didn't know what they were in for. Is that true? Or did Mr. Titanic warn the father-son duo before the deadly dive? If he did, and they did it regardless, what was going on in their minds, in their hearts, what was going on emotionally? Now, if you think about it, the CEO clearly knew the risks, right? Stockton Rush knew the risks and was prepared to take them. The pilot, P.H. Nargile, arguably knew the risks even more. And Hamish Harding, he had actually been down to the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, with an explorer called Victor Vescovo. Hamish ought to have known not only the dangers, but also known what a well-built craft and an above-board operation looked like. But the father and son duo, one could argue, were truly innocent in the sense that they went in blind, didn't they? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the thousands of you who have subscribed. I'm going to be doing a fascinating deep dive into the backstory of Stockton Rush's great-grandfather. This is really going to shock. This is going to blow the socks off your feet when you see what sort of skeletons are revealed in Stockton Rush's closet. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So what was going on with this father and son? What was going on emotionally? Why did they go on this dive? Did they not get any warning? Well, it turns out they did. Shahzada's wife, Christine, told the New York Times, she said, that engineering side, we just had no idea. She said, I mean, you sit in a plane without knowing how the engine works, right? And once again, we see Stockton Rush personally going all the way to London to recruit passengers. And part of that recruitment process is convincing them that it is safe and it's worthwhile and worth the risk. Now, interestingly, his wife, Wendy, Stockton's wife, Wendy, was there as well. And one imagines that Wendy's also promoting and pushing the same PR as her husband. Otherwise, if not, what was she doing? Was she shopping while he was speaking to this family? So right there at a cafe in Waterloo Station, apparently the design of the submersible was explained along with the safety side, but you can imagine the bias is to say, no, I wouldn't worry about that, and we've tested it many times. And one can imagine Stockton using his stock statement.
And in the last 35 years, there hasn't been a serious injury, and there have been over 15 million people go in them. Now, most of those are in tourist submersibles, but they're statistically the safest vehicles on the planet.
And if the Dawoods didn't understand carbon fiber, Stockton was there to say something along the lines that, did you know carbon fiber is used on the wings of the A380? Did you know that? Perhaps he'd also say something like this to his prospective Dawood clients.
One of the things that I think a lot of people appreciate is if you're not breaking things, you're not innovating. If you're operating within a known environment, as most submersible manufacturers do, they don't break things. Woods Hole does a lot of autonomous things. They have a whole wall of stuff they've broken. To me, the more stuff you've broken, the more innovative you've been. And this is a third scale model that we took to the chamber at the University of Washington and took it to destruction.
And if he name drops a couple of companies, NASA, Boeing, who are they to say, wow, you're not working with some of the best minds in the business? And I have to say, if somebody stopped me at the gate, I recently caught a A380 flight to New York and back. And if someone had stopped me at the gate and showed me this graphic and said, or warned me, look here, there's carbon fiber in the wings. I'd shrug and say, well, there hasn't been an incident so far. So you don't have to know that or understand how it works to know that it's safe, right? That would be the argument. You get on a plane, you get on a train, you get on a SpaceX rocket, and it just works. The Titan's the same. We are the SpaceX of the ocean, and that is literally how Stockton Rush saw himself. I've spoken about hubris, megalomania, and delusions of grandeur. Well, here it is again. Someone who is so selective about reality, he can't quite see what is right in front of him. Fairy tales are a lot like that. You want something so badly, you ignore the monsters that underpin it, the nightmare that the fairy tale is designed to beat back. So, was OceanGate really the SpaceX of the ocean? Well, not really, no. But one does get a sense that the company tried to trade up by name-dropping familiar brands. Boeing, NASA, SpaceX. And as for the A380, the main difference is the Titan is an experimental craft, and the carbon fiber aspect in particular is scientifically questionable. An A380 is certified and benefits from a decades-long legacy of aviation and aeronautics engineering. Stockton Rush's million-dollar baby was not only a new innovation, but one he didn't seem to want to hand over for independent testing. As a result, he was innovating in the dark, paying teenagers and engineering students basically a minimum wage. In any event, Stockton's pitch to the Dawoods worked in February, and so by June the Dawoods were in Newfoundland, and from there they headed out on the Polar Prince. And so this is the bottom line. While on the ship, P.H. Nargile made a presentation. He told his wide-eyed audience that during one of his 37 visits to the Titanic, he was stuck down there in an OceanGate submersible for 3 days without communication. In other words, an under-the-sea version of this. We can confirm the veracity of this story because Dawood's widow, Christine Dawood, was on board the Polar Prince as an original passenger, and she heard it herself. And so what was their response to hearing about this disaster near the Titanic? She said her husband wasn't fazed by the story and he remained eager to go on the trip. She said that he'd said, "Oh my God, this is so cool." She said that he was lapping everything up and that he had this big glow on his face talking about all of this nerdy stuff. In other words, he was already drunk on the Kool-Aid as well. Now, what's also interesting is some of the analogies heard during some of these presentations was that what can happen if you're crushed by the extreme pressure, it's like a Coke can being smashed with a sledgehammer, or an elephant standing on one foot with 100 more elephants on top of it, and that death would be instantaneous. Some people said, well, in a macabre way, that was reassuring. And so if you think about it, if you go back through their story, their narrative, the Dawood's first sip of the Titanic Kool-Aid started in 2012. They became fascinated with the Titanic after visiting an exhibition in Singapore in 2012. That's more than 11 years ago. So it shows you how long this passion, this idea, this fantasy, this fairy tale was hibernating, how long it was kind of on a slow boil. And they'd actually been there on the 100th anniversary of the ship sinking, right? 2012 as opposed to 1912. And so apparently some items on display had possibly been lifted to the surface by Mr. Nargile. And they actually kind of realized that. The New York Times does a great job blowing life back into the story, saying, although these artifacts from the Titanic weren't the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park, or in the words of the article, the confections of Willy Wonka, this was an opportunity to see firsthand something really special through a big 21-inch porthole, the world's most famous shipwreck at the bottom of the sea. And now we're starting to really understand the source of the Kool-Aid's potency. It's not necessarily that you care about shipwrecks, but you see how much everybody else cares. It's not that the story of Titanic naturally resonates with you, but you see how many books and movies are made about it. And then you can kind of appreciate there's a prestige around this. In the same way that there's a prestige around Everest, you notice people, how impressed they are, how impressed certain people are with other people that have gone to the mountain. And maybe you don't really care about mountain climbing, and maybe you don't really like mountains, but you see that other people are really caught up in that whole thing, and so you do that because it's a ticket, an easy ticket to kind of a badge of honor, right? And so this whole idea of going down to see the Titanic is in a strange way like getting an Everest summit photo in the ocean, which is why that conceit that is raising one's country's flag on the world's highest mountain is repeated here. So the attraction becomes the prestige, becoming a standout citizen where you can literally emerge out of the murk and be seen as a citizen celebrity for having done something not many people do. That's the prize. The prize is prestige, or to use another word, ego. And of course it's risky. So think about it. When you're pursuing prestige, when that's your motive, the point soon becomes knowing there is danger and going regardless, because that's even more prestigious. To succeed, to survive, to demonstrate your preeminence over your fellow man. In other words, where others failed or lost their nerve, you've succeeded. So that being the case, is this the answer? Should we let Titanic rest in peace? Should nobody go down there? And I think the answer is to each his own. That's the short answer. But I think the longer answer is there have been so many innovations because of man's curiosity, because of man's courage to some extent. And so as a result of that, we do learn we should try to be brave, but also try and be smart, right? So in much the same way that Everest is a graveyard of human ambitions, literally dead bodies lying exposed beside human poo strewn up and down the world's highest mountain, in the deepest sea, the Titanic also represents a graveyard of human conditions. Whatever your aspirations are, the one is a graveyard high in the sky, another one is a graveyard deep in the sea. It's perhaps very appropriate that both these symbols have been appropriated once again thanks to the same flavor of Kool-Aid that got the original tourists to go up there and get themselves killed in the first place. And so the answer to whether you should go up or not, or go down, is up to you. Some people find meaning in a grain of sand, others in a ray of sunshine, others in a painting, or taking a dog for a walk. But others need more, to each his own. According to the New York Times, quote, Shahzada Dawood was a 48-year-old British-Pakistani businessman from one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. He was vice chairman of Engro Corporation, a business conglomerate headquartered in the port city of Karachi that is involved in agriculture, energy, and telecommunications. So were the father and son duo really innocent? Did they really not know? Well, in a criminal context, obviously they were innocent. But if we're fair, we know now that they knew the risks. Absolutely, they knew the risks, and they went in order to be able to brag about it. Suleiman, instead of taking a flag, he wanted to be the first to say that he'd solved the Rubik's Cube beside the Titanic. And so you can imagine everyone who's going down there is trying to set some kind of benchmark. PH is trying to say, this is my 38th time down to the Titanic, the Guinness Book of Records for that sort of thing. Stockton Rush is trying to be the SpaceX of the ocean. Hamish Harding is trying to, you have the seven summits with mountain climbing. He's trying to do perhaps the 7 deepest dives in the ocean, whatever it is. And then this father and son duo also want to have this prestige where they can say, the most famous shipwreck in the world? We went there. It was dangerous and this went wrong and that went wrong, but guess what? We did it anyway and we survived. We triumphed over adversity. our courage shone through where many others were too afraid, and then they can have that story to tell. And of course, sometimes things go wrong and you don't have a story to tell, and the fairy tale is unable to push back the nightmare. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but I am going to be doing a follow-up episode to this one, a fascinating episode that probes, that plumbs the depths of Stockton Rush's family history going back 180 years, where we're going to find a startling instance of history repeating itself. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.